Hello students, and welcome to week 3 of our first unit, Cells and Systems. This week we'll be going over organ systems and the organ systems that were introduced in this week's at-home activities. So, our warm-up, as always, is to take 2 minutes to write about one thing you learned about the different body systems this week. So teachers, once again, feel free to pause the video for 2 minutes in order to allow students to write down what they learned. So, let's go over what we learned this week. So we started off with the nervous system, and some main questions that you should be able to answer are: what is the main purpose of the nervous system? What are each of the main components of the brain called? What does each part do? And then we have the skeletal system. What are a few of the important processes of the skeletal system? What are some of the major components of the skeletal system? And what are different parts of a bone? And then the muscular system. How do muscles work and where are they located? What are different types of muscles called? And then we have the endocrine system. What does the endocrine system regulate? What are hormones and why are they important for the endocrine system? So you should be able to answer these using your knowledge from the at-home activities, or we'll be able to review them today and you should be able to answer them by the end of today's activity. So once again, we will first be taking some notes, so pay attention to the slides and fill in the blanks with relevant information. So, the nervous system. The nervous system involves the brain and the spinal cord as part of the central nervous system, or CNS. Fibers made up of neurons called nerves run through the body and form the peripheral nervous system, or PNS. The nervous system coordinates the other body systems and regulates movement and emotions. The nervous system helps respond to outside stimuli such as pain, pressure, or heat. So, if you have your hand and you put it on a hot surface, you instinctively remove it because of the nervous system. It's a reaction. So, your brain responds to outside stimuli. So, these are the things in the world going on around us, like I said, pain, pressure, heat, and the nervous system helps respond to this. And the brain has 3 main components: the cerebrum, or the thinking part of the brain, where conscious thought, memory, and reasoning occur. So these are the higher processes, or they're known as the higher processes. And then we have the brainstem, which controls involuntary movement like breathing, blood circulation, and digestion. And this is the control center. So these things are involuntary. We don't control our digestion or our blood circulation, and this is why the brainstem is very important. Is a very important component of the brain. And then we have the cerebellum, which controls voluntary movement. So this controls coordination. So if I pick something up, or I'm writing something with a pencil, or you're running around, these are voluntary movements that the cerebellum will help control. And then neurons are cells that transmit electrical signals between each other and serve as the basis for how the nervous system works. And the brain has over 10 billion neurons. So that's a lot of neurons, and that's why they're such a key part of the nervous system. And each neuron is comprised of 3 parts. The cell body, which contains the nucleus, which is essentially the control center of the neuron, and then we have dendrites. Dendrites are fibers that carry electrical impulses to the cell body. And then we have axons, which carry electrical signals away from the cell body. And neurotransmitters help send a neuron's signals across synapses, or gaps between neurons. So neurons are not connected, and there's small gaps, small because, neurons are small cells and you can't see them, and they're very, very tiny, but there's small gaps between the neurons, and neurotransmitters will help send signals between these gaps. Here. And you can see here, in this photo, we have a diagram of the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So the central nervous system is highlighted in purple, and that includes the brain and the brainstem, which goes down the spine here. And then we have the peripheral nervous system, which includes all the nerves that run all throughout the body. And you can see they go everywhere, through here, through your hands, legs. And that's basically the 2 components of the nervous system. And then down here, we have an example of a neuron. So we have dendrites that are right here by the cell body. And remember, they carry electrical signals towards the cell body. And then the axon, which runs along here, carries signals away from the cell body. So, if another neuron's over here, it would go to the dendrites to the cell body, and out towards the axon terminals, which will send it to a different cell. So, we have the skeletal system. And the skeletal system is made up of 206 bones, each with a different function. Additionally, the skeletal system also includes tendons, ligaments, and cartilage. Tendons attach bones to muscles. Ligaments connect bone to other bones, and cartilage is found in the joints and help bones slide against each other. So if you had two bones that just slided against each other with nothing in between them, this would be very damaging to the bones, and it would be very hard to do. So that's where joints and cartilage are important, because it helps the bones slide against each other, which makes it easier to move. And then 70% of bones are made up of hard minerals like calcium. So you have the saying, drinking a lot of milk gives you strong bones, and that's because milk contains calcium, and drinking milk will help you replenish these stores of calcium that are within your bones. And then the outside of the bone is called the cortical bone. It's hard, smooth, and solid, and you can see it here. And then you have inside the cortical bone is a porous, spongy material called the trabecular or cancellous bone. And it is lighter in order for it to be easier to move around. So if our bones were completely solid, they would be very heavy, and it would be very hard for us to move our bones around. So that's why there's the hard outer part, and then the spongy bone or the cancellous bone, and that makes it much easier for us to move our bones around, so we can have easier movement of our hands and of our entire body. And then we have, and of course, the spongy part of the bone also allows for blood vessels to run through and make bones more bendable, preventing frequent broken bones. So of course, as I said before, if our bones were completely solid, it would be very easy for them to break. So bones are slightly bendable, as in like you might hit yourself hard on the bone, but it won't shatter it or it won't break it. That's because they're slightly bendable, and it doesn't make them as susceptible to being broken. And then we have the skeletal system has a few major functions, and this includes to support the body's weight, to protect organs. So think of how you have a skull, and the skull protects your brain, or you have your rib cage that protects your lungs and your heart. And then we have to move around. So bones help us move around, and then the skeletal system also helps develop red and white blood cells. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then we have to store nutrients such as calcium and iron. So of course, calcium is stored within the bones. So bones serve as a good storage for these minerals or nutrients. And then bone marrow is located within the bones and comes in two types. You have yellow marrow, which is mostly just fat cells, and then red marrow, which is important because it produces red and white blood cells. And that's very, very important for the body. And then we have joints, which are when bones come together, so such as your knees, or your elbows. So this is a joint right here. I can bend my elbow back and forth, and that's where cartilage comes into play to help the bones slide against each other, as to not be able to, so they don't grind against each other and damage the bone. And then broken bones can heal in multiple stages. So if you've ever had a broken bone, you know that you get like a cast, and then it slowly heals as time goes on. So right here, we have a diagram of a bone. So you have the spongy bone right here, and that would be like the porous part of the bone. And then you have the outside of the bone. Cartilage would be located on the side in order to prevent the bone from directly contacting a different bone. And then we have blood vessels that run through the porous part of the bone. We have the yellow bone marrow, which is located right there within the center of the bone. And then red bone marrow, which is located on the sides, which is where red and white blood cells are produced. And of course, down here is another diagram of the skeletal system and the different bones that are within our bodies. Now we have the muscular system. So there are over 650 muscles in the human body and are located under our skin but cover our bones. So they're over our bones but under our skin. So we don't see them, but they're not within our bones. They're right on top of our bones. And muscles work by expanding and contracting. Muscles are made up of groups of cells, groups of long cells, and nerves send signals to the muscle fibers, and proteins and proteins and or chemicals release energy that help a muscle contract or relax. So you can see here in the diagram, these are the long cells that are located. This is specifically the smooth muscle, and you see that when they're relaxed, they're long like this, and when they contract, they squeeze up like that. And that's how the muscles work. They work by expanding and contracting. And then many muscles come in pairs, such as our biceps and our triceps. When one muscle relaxes, the other contracts, which allows for movement forwards and backwards. So if the bicep contracts, then the tricep relaxes. Or if the bicep relaxes, the tricep contracts. And they work in pairs. So a lot of our muscles come in pairs, and this allows for forward and backwards movement. And then there are three types of muscles. We have skeletal muscles, and these are muscles which are used to move around and are voluntary, so we control these. And then we have smooth muscles, which these muscles control our organs in our body and are involuntary, so we don't control what smooth muscles do. And then we have cardiac muscles, and these muscles pump our heart and blood throughout the body. So these muscles help keep our heart pumping and blood moving throughout the entire body. And then tendons, as we said before, can connect muscle to bone. And as we exercise, muscles become stronger, and if we don't use them, they become very weak. So this is why it's important in a very balanced lifestyle that we always go outside and use our muscles, because if we're sitting all the time, our muscles will become very, very weak. So this is why we should exercise them. We don't have to always lift weights. You can do things like play sports, walk around, whatever you do, just make sure those muscles are healthy. And then as we continue to practice an action over and over, muscles become more precise and we have greater control over them, which is known as muscle memory. So this is where the term, practice makes perfect comes into play. So if you are learning to play an instrument or you're learning to play a sport, the more you practice that sport or instrument, the more you will have greater control over your muscles, and you'll be able to play that sport or play that instrument much, much better because of muscle memory. And of course, I talked about the diagram here, and here we have a diagram of the different muscles within our body. So finally, we have the endocrine system, and the endocrine system is comprised of glands that release hormones into the bloodstream. And these hormones help regulate mood, growth, metabolism, our organs, and reproduction. So the pituitary gland is the control center of all the other glands, and it helps regulate growth. The thyroid gland helps regulate metabolism, whereas the pancreas produces insulin and glucagon, which helps regulate blood sugar levels in the blood. The thymus gland helps produce white blood cells, which are important for the immune system as they help fight disease and infections. And then adrenaline controls the body's fight or flight. Here I have flight or fight, but fight or flight response. So essentially, when something happens, something that startles you, you're either ready to fight or, flight, which essentially means kind of move away from the danger. So if you're startled by a loud sound, you're either like very surprised and your senses are heightened, and that's kind of the fight response, or the flight response would be kind of you back away, you step back, you run back, and that's kind of where adrenaline comes into play. And so each gland is very important because it regulates something, and we have the pituitary gland, which is essentially the head gland, which controls all the other ones. So now we have the most important organ system activity. This is very similar to last week, how we did our tier list of all the different organ systems, but today we're just going to focus on the 4 organ systems we learned today. So take 3 minutes to pick one of the 4 organ systems you learned about and write one reason why it's most important. You also might want to write its function or what it does, or just why it's so important in the body. And then discuss with a classmate about your choice and compare it to what they chose for 2 minutes. So take some time to write yourself and then discuss with a classmate, compare your opinions, see where you agree, see where you disagree, and make sure you have a discussion and you listen to their opinion and make sure they listen to your opinion so you can both learn and uh, have better discussions. And of course, remember, maintain proper social distancing. And of course, if you can't maintain proper social distancing, teachers, you feel free to make this a class discussion where everyone raises their hand and they can talk about what they chose. So take 5 minutes to complete this activity, and then we'll move on to the next activity. So after you discuss the most important organ system, we're going to go over the week 3 review crossword puzzle. So you're going to take about 20 minutes to complete the crossword puzzle that reviews major ideas from this lesson and some ideas from previous lessons. So it's not limited to what we learned today, but the notes you have today are very important, and this will help you review what you learned through the notes. And if you have access to previous lessons or previous at-home activities, you might want to look at that because some of the questions will deal with cells or organelles that we talked about a few weeks earlier, and just to review and make sure you still have a grasp on those concepts. So if you need a quick review on how a crossword puzzle works, just where it says a cross, there'll be a number that corresponds to a set of boxes. And if it's a cross, the boxes will go across the page. And if it says blank is the blah, 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 the powerhouse of the cell, you can say mitochondria and you put each letter in the corresponding box. So you spell out mitochondria and it should fit in all the boxes. And if it says down, each the number will correspond to the number and write it downwards. So if it's like cells, you start CELLS. So you should be able to understand how the crossword puzzle works, but if you need a little help, try asking your classmates or have the teacher help you out to get started. So that will basically be it. So you'll have 20 minutes to work on that, and if you still have a little bit of extra time, go back and review, as always, the at-home activities and finish them if you didn't finish them. If you have a few questions, make sure to ask your classmates because they might have some answers that you don't, and you want to make sure you understand all the concepts from the past 3 weeks. So thank you so much. Good luck with your crossword, and have a great day.